Why, hello everyone. Today I'm going to tell you a story about a man named William Wilberforce and his fight against the Atlantic slave trade. Not sure what the slave trade was and why it needed to be fought against? Let's start from there. The Atlantic slave trade started around the 1500s and was a horrible journey that began in Britain. Boats would sail to Africa and brutally steal people from their homes to become slaves in the parts of America that Britain owned at the time. These people were once free people, living in their own country, and now they were being forced away from their families to be someone else's property for the rest of their lives. This also meant any children and grandchildren they had while being a slave would be taken too. Everything was a mess. By British people stealing the Africans, they were now seen as being owned by Britain and would never, ever be considered British. The journey from Africa to America went across the Atlantic Ocean, giving it the name the Atlantic slave trade. The journey took about 2 months, and it was not like the cruises you might go on today. No, life as a slave on these boats was not really a life at all. The Africans were forced to lie down, chained to one another, unable to sit up from the low ceilings or move from being so close together. 1 in every 5 slaves on board would die before they even reached America due to the terrible conditions on the boat. If a slave survived the crossing and arrived in America, I'm sorry to say that life didn't get any better. In fact, it got worse. Slaves were made to work for free on the land that the British owned, harvesting things like sugar and cotton that would later be taken back to Britain to be sold. They were treated like dirt. Sometimes captains of the ships heading back to Britain would even take the African slaves to sell for more money to rich British families. This horrible cycle continued from around 1560 to 1808, almost 250 years. I wish I could say that all British people were against it from happening, but for a long time we weren't. The slave trade gave Britain lots of money and people were getting greedy. So greedy that they were ignoring how much they made the Africans suffer. Plus back then, they didn't have the BBC to record what was going on inside the ships or in America. The bad people were able to present the trade as something good for the country. But like I said, the trade stopped in 1808. Though not easily. It took years of campaigning and fighting to finally end it. Now with the way Britain viewed black people in those days, it was never going to be a group of black people that fought against those in charge. This was because most Africans then were black, so British people often saw any black person as a slave and less important than them just because of their skin colour. This feeling that black people were less important made most white people at the time not care about the suffering happening to the Africans. It needed to be a white person who had a voice black people weren't given. Enter in William Wilberforce. Born in 1759 in the English city of Hull, he grew up going to rich boarding schools and then the University of Cambridge. In 1780, he began his political career at just 21. He had an important job called an MP, which made him a member of something called the House of Commons. He got to be part of decision-making about new laws, but these decisions could still be blocked by politicians with more power. Now William had been quite the party animal when he was at university, but this all changed when he became a Christian in 1785, 5 years after becoming an MP. He decided he wanted to do something good with his political power and became friends with a group of 7 men in London who were wanting to abolish the slave trade, which is a fancy word for getting rid of it forever. So on the 22nd of May, 1787, they started the abolishment movement. William was often seen as the face of the movement due to his political power and being the main speaker of the group. Towards the end of the year it started, William told the rest of the House of Commons that he was going to begin asking to end the slave trade soon, which not many people were happy about. But he kept his promise, making his first big speech to everyone in May 1789, explaining the different reasons why the slave trade was so horrible and needed to be stopped. 2 years later, William was finally allowed to make his first proper attempt at asking for the slave trade to become illegal. Sadly, he was defeated by a lot when the House of Commons voted. Remember what I said about people being greedy with the money Britain was making? It had totally blinded them from seeing what they were doing was so awful. William didn't give up though. He tried to do the same every year he could after that, even when people were so angry at him for trying. Finally, in 1807, and after 11 attempts at ending the slave trade, something changed. William wrote and published a very, very long book about the trade and why it needed to be stopped, including all the gruesome things that the slave owners and snatchers were doing to the Africans. When he next went to the House of Commons to ask to abolish the trade, he won. Beginning the 1st of May, 1807, it was illegal for any ship to leave Britain looking for slaves, and a year later, on the same date, it became illegal for any new slaves to be brought to the bits of America that Britain owned. Unfortunately, there were still slaves in America, but by Britain making it illegal, William hoped it would encourage the people in charge of other countries to do the same. So William got what he came for after all those years. His next goal was to free all the slaves that were already working, which was a whole new law. But William was 49 when he abolished the slave trade, and he wasn't very well. He needed to pass the baton to younger folk with the same dreams and drive. In 1821, he recruited a man called Thomas to carry on the fight to free the slaves. Just 3 months before William died, he made one last speech, all about why the slaves needed to be let go. Something must have worked, because just 2 months later, and 3 days before William died, it was made law that every slave owned by Britain would be freed in America. How is that for timing? He died knowing his dream was coming true, after 46 years fighting and fighting for those who had been stolen, enslaved and abused for so long. So, that is the story of William Wilberforce, and that's where I'll leave it. But you must go on and find out what happened next in the search for true equality for black people. I hope you can be inspired to also fight for fairness, just like William did.